So welcome to this sixth panel of the Climate Festival. We're here in Copenhagen at the Litteraturhaus, and with me are the author Theis Ørntoft and the author Siri Ranva Jacobsen. This panel is called Beyond Human, and it will be structured in the way that I will start by giving a presentation about climate fiction, and then Theis and Siri will read from their work, and then I will have a Q&A with Theis and Siri. So let me start by introducing myself. My name is Gregers Andersen, and I'm a PhD in Arts and Cultural Studies. I am currently employed at Stockholm University. But more important in this context is that I have a long-standing research interest in climate fiction, which last year culminated in the publication of my monograph, Climate Fiction and Cultural Analysis. So in the monograph, I focus mainly on Anglophone cli-fi, which will also be the main source of my talk today. Although I'll also touch upon Scandinavian cli-fi and eco-literature, since I have Theis and Siri with me. But let me start by showing you a movie clip, which I think epitomizes quite well what cli-fi is and is particularly good at doing. The clip derives from the movie What Happened to Monday, which premiered on Netflix in 2017 and begins in the following way.
In the last 50 years, we've doubled our population, tripled the amount of food and water we use, and we have quadrupled the use of fossil fuels. Every 4 days, there's 1 million more people on the planet.
How is the world going to cope with this explosion in population?
The UN predicts that by the end of the decade, we will have a population of 10 billion.
I am a firm believer that climate change is real, that it is impacted by human behavior.
The government has declared most of South America a disaster zone.
Extreme drought and massive dust storms have shut down the Earth's entire agricultural system.
Too many people, not enough food.
In an effort to combat the food shortage, the European Federation has placed the world's future into the hands of science. The development of more resilient, high-yield, genetically modified crops is being fast-tracked around the globe. Shelves once empty are now fully stocked.
But the tinkering with nature has created long-term consequences. Across the world, we are witnessing a staggering spike in multiple births and genetic defects.
The solution is now feeding the problem.
It is the biggest crisis in human history.
Political activist and renowned conservation biologist Dr. Nicolette Kamen has prompted the Federation to institute a one-child-per-family policy called the Child Allocation Act.
We are one human family sharing this earth. Today, together, we make history. The Child Allocation Act is the first vital step towards preserving our planet and making a better future for our children.
New legislation has been swift. Checkpoints have been erected across the nation. All citizens are required to wear a bureau-issued identity bracelet. And from this day forth, illegally conceived siblings will be remanded to bureau-enforced cryosleep.
Children are more than just children. They are the future. With cryosleep, we'll make sure your child rests peacefully, humanely, free from hunger, safe from harm, while we work to build a better, brighter future. Cryosleep. Awake to a better world.
I know there's maybe a lot of resistance, but with a one-child policy, it may give us some time.
So what is it that this clip can learn us about climate fiction? Well, first of all, I think it offers us a clue of what climate fiction or cli-fi is. So in my book, Climate Fiction and Cultural Analysis, I define cli-fi as fiction that incorporates the scientific paradigm of anthropogenic global warming in its plot or world making. Hence, just as the route of anthropogenic global warming from marginal theory to mainstream science represents a paradigmatic break in human history, So I think thus the rise of fictions that depict and thematize this phenomenon in the history of fiction. So in my definition, cli-fi is, and also other scholars' definition, cli-fi is fiction that utilize the scientific paradigm of anthropogenic global warming in their world-making. So second, returning to the question of what the clip I showed you can learn us about climate fiction, the clip also introduces us to what I would call the speculative relevance of cli-fi. That is, it shows how cli-fi can contribute to a better understanding of life in the various possible futures made imaginable by the projections of the natural sciences. For example, climate models or other kinds of projections from the natural sciences. Or to push this argument even further, like science fiction, of which it can be said that it exists to prevent and invent the future, one may say of climate fiction that it is first and foremost a speculative genre in which futures are often invented in order to be prevented. So I would say that climate fiction is very often has an activist agenda in the sense that it will try to push us away from this catastrophist future that we are moving towards with climate change and other ecological crisis signs. Yeah, so this also means that, as I said, cli-fi very often depicts futures in order to make present potential future dangers visible to readers and viewers who can, to a certain degree, still avoid the realization of these dangers. So I think this is an important point, that cli-fi often moves ahead in the future in order to display to readers and viewers in the present how bad things can go if we do not change our behavior. So from the vantage point or sort of the departure point of the future, many cli-fi simply put a mirror up that sort of points back towards the present and our current mannerisms and way of behavior, which is not, of course, sustainable. And another point here is, of course, also the dangers that I think, because cli-fi moves into the future, it has this ability at pointing at potential dangers that are not exactly visible for us at the moment. For example, in the movie What Happened to Monday that I just showed you a clip from, well, the sort of danger that the movie makes visible is about resource scarcity and the question of who shall have food and drinking water in a world that is really scarce on resources, and what kind of regimes that can occur from that quite dangerous situation. So although the window for avoiding catastrophic global warming is, of course, rapidly closing and has, in some respects, already closed, yet the sort of multiple of possible meanings that this sort of catastrophic global warming can have for human and non-human existence in different looking futures, this is basically what cli-fi tends to explore. Indeed, my research has shown that, in particular, cli-fi explores this multitude of possible meanings that anthropogenic global warming could have for humans and non-humans in different-looking futures via 5 reoccurring imaginaries, or as I call them, imagination forms. So the first of these imagination forms I call the social collapse. And according to this imagination form, anthropogenic global warming will result in an accelerating social disintegration and interhuman violence on a large scale. This can be sort of in the form of war, for example, prompted by political conflicts about which countries should mitigate, or how much they should mitigate their greenhouse gas emissions. And an example here is Matthew Glath's thriller Ultimatum, in which this question about how much greenhouse gas emissions should be reduced actually results in a war between the US and China. Another example is Omar el-Akkad's American War, in which the American North, the northern states in America and the southern state, actually enters a civil war because of this question. Northern states want in the future to abandon fossil fuels, and this actually prompts the South to enter a war with the North. Another form that this imagination form can take in climate fiction is fictive worlds in which the veneer of civilization has been pulled aside. That is, it prompts worlds where the institutions that once protected human well-being have collapsed and has been replaced by anarchic manifestations of brutality. For example, this is the case in Marcel Thoreau's post-apocalyptic sci-fi novel Far North. And one can also mention the sci-fi horror movie The Colony from 2013, in which there are no longer any food on the planet because humanity has tried to deal with global warming by making machines that makes the climate colder, which actually prompts some world that is sort of full of ice and there's no food, so actually humans end up eating each other. The second imagination form I call the judgment. According to this imagination form, anthropogenic global warming will at some point instigate aggressive reactions from the non-human world to the human misuse inflicted upon it. More precisely, this imagination form allows sci-fi to display worlds in which the non-human world comes alive to pass judgment on humanity and often punish it on a scale that forces humanity to stop its unsustainable behavior. That is, forces humanity to pass judgment on itself and adjust its behavior. For example, this is the case in Franz Schätzing's eco-thriller The Swarm from 2004, and in the well-known disaster movie The Day After Tomorrow from 2004 also. As you will remember, perhaps, The Day After Tomorrow starts with this scene in the UN where the American vice president refuses to react to the warnings put forward to him by the main protagonist in the movie, the climate scientist. And this is, of course, in a way, the offense that causes the later disastrous development that we see later, where the non-human world comes alive in a way to punish humanity. So the third imagination form I call the conspiracy. According to this imagination form, anthropogenic global warming is the kernel in a conspiracy. So in the sci-fi utilizing this imagination form, the difference between science and politics, truth and ideology breaks down, as science turns out to be a container for a political and economic interest. Consequently, the characters in these worlds tend to live in an atmosphere of constant suspicion, bordering on paranoia. For example, in the climate skeptic climate fiction Pixelang, Michael Crichton's thriller State of Fear, we have an left-wing NGO who basically tries to con the rest of the world by creating some phenomena that look like climate disasters in order to accumulate power and money and political momentum. So the fourth imagination form is the loss of wilderness. According to this imagination form, anthropogenic global warming will result in the destruction of the least cultivated areas on Earth, or the last wildernesses. This is therefore also the imagination that anthropogenic global warming marks the last step in a process that has not only turned human existence into a being everywhere, but which is also reducing life on Earth to a self-destructive monoculture. What we find here is thus the idea that the loss of the planet's last wildernesses marks an irreversible step in humanity's self-destruction. For example, this is the idea that appears in Jean McNeill's novel The Ice Lovers and Ilya Troyan's novel Ice Town. in both novels we have characters who sort of visit Antarctica or the Arctic only to see the human destruction, or the destruction that humans has caused in these places, and this actually results in a very dystopic world where there's sort of little that suggests that human will be in the long run be able to survive. So the last of my 5 imagination form is the sphere. According to this imagination form, anthropogenic global warming will result in the construction of engineered atmospheres vital to human survival. In climate fiction, such spheres are typically imagined to materialize after the depletion of the biosphere has made the living condition of most human and non-human life forms uninhabitable. To be more precise, this situation tends to prompt 2 different types of spheric worlds, the bubble and the globe. The bubble has a limited social design and therefore raises the question of whom and what shall be protected, whereas the globe is big enough to protect all humans and most non-human life forms. I guess many of you have seen the movie Elysium from 2013 starring Matt Damon, which has this sort of sphere up in the upper parts of the atmosphere, while the sort of most of humanity is left on Earth, Earth that is overpopulated, filled with disease and sort of also suffering from overheating, while these sort of hard climatic conditions and hard social conditions don't exist in this sort of engineered sphere that only the rich are able to live in. So let me now turn my look towards Scandinavia. After all, we are here in Copenhagen today. So I would say, in general, the first manifestation of international cli-fi appear in the early 1970s. For example, there is a reference to the greenhouse effect in the movie Soylent Green from 1973. So if we look to Scandinavia, we can also see in the early 1970s at least some fictions that deal with environmental problems. But these works are not, I would say, in the strictest sense, cli-fi, or at least not in the sense that I have sort of in my definition of cli-fi. Rather, the kernel in these sort of literary works, or literary works like The Dolphin, environmentalist poems by Danish author Torkild Bjørnvig, and The Evening Country by Norwegian author Knut Faldbakken, is more sort of a general ecological concern, which partly seems to derive from the publication of the Club of Rome's report Limits to Growth. So the point is basically, I would say that in these fiction there is the concern with environmental problems is mainly sort of on a local scale. We are experiencing in these worlds how industry is causing local destruction, but we are not really on that sort of global scale that we arrive in later with anthropogenic climate change, where sort of the human havoc is basically something that is the effects of that is appearing all over the globe. I don't have sort of a clear idea of when, or I cannot give you a specific fictional work or a year in which anthropogenic global warming enters Scandinavian literature for the first time. But I think it's sort of a very important event in this context is sort of the publication of Lars Skinnebak's book of sort of short text and poems called Experiments and Ritual Text from 2011. This is basically, I would say, a key event, if not in Scandinavian cli-fi or literature that deals with anthropogenic climate change, so at least in a sort of a Danish context. Skinnebak's book is sort of famous here in Denmark for sort of the line that you see below here in my slides, poetry not occupied with the climate crisis is a waste of time. It is like playing the violin while the ship is sinking. So indeed, the two authors I have with me here today, Theis Ørntoft and Siri Ranva Hjelm Jacobsen, who will read for us in a moment, are two of sort of the growing number of Danish authors who have sort of followed in the paths laid out by Skinnebak. For example, Ørntoft's critically acclaimed poems 2014 represents an important milestone in what could be called Danish eco-poetry. Some of the poems in Poems 2014 describe a future, a post-apocalyptic world, while others focus more closely on how the human is ingrained in the Earth system, a theme that is also present in Ørntoft's recent novel, Solar, from 2018. Siri Ranva Hjelm Jacobsen made her literary debut in 2016 with the novel Island. However, in the context of the global ecological crisis, it is primarily Jacobsen's latest book, The Sea Letters, from 2018, which stands out. The Sea Letters stages a correspondence in letters between the Atlantic and Mediterranean oceans, a correspondence which frequently touches upon humans' misuse of the Earth's oceans. Indeed, to a certain extent, the imagined form of the judgment appears here as the oceans seem to plan the extinction of humanity. So now it's time for Siri to read from her work. So Siri, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll start by introducing the ladies.
Siri Ranva Hjelm Jacobsen, The Sea Letters. Excerpt translated by Jennifer Russell. The Atlantic, 180 million years old, ancient and brusque but not without tenderness, loves the universe. Nothing can take this ocean by surprise anymore. The Mediterranean, 5 million years old, little sister to the Atlantic, loves to sparkle, Icarus, and when large flocks of animals drift by. Dear M, when I collect water from the creepers, I sometimes get wind of your doings. The other day, for instance, it was a she, and when I sifted through her memories, I found this pearl, which I think you'll like. When I was a child, we travelled to Tuscany. We arrived in Cortona on the dark green mountain, and were put up behind the cloister walls. I remember the quiet halls, the sound and smell of stone. The nuns who floated about in their habits made me uncomfortable. Perhaps I was a little scared of them. When we were leaving, the nuns came out to the courtyard to wave goodbye, and one of them slipped me a peach. It was strange and somehow solemn to be given a peach by a nun. She was old, too, that's how I remember her, with fingers like the leftover skins of blanched almonds. I decided that the fruit was important, and not meant just to be eaten, but to be saved for a sensible purpose. We got on a big bus and drove out to the coast. I cradled my peach in both hands. By the time we got off on a beach, its downy skin was bruised and juice oozed from soft, dark blotches. I walked down to the water's edge. The sea said, "Give me back my peach." "How is it your peach?" I asked. "Surely it's the tree's peach, or the nun's, or mine." It was very hot, and the sun was shushing us, so I had to sit in the wet sand and lean my face all the way down to where the small pebbles and seaweed murmured to catch the sea's reply. "All fruits are mine," the sea answered. "All blood in the veins of lilies and trees, all sweat and spit of animals, all of it is mine." I listened, stooped over and stunned. My hand slackened around the warm, sticky fruit. The sea went on. "The fluids sloshing around inside you, unknown even to you, those are mine. All flesh is mine, and a failed attempt." "A failed attempt at what?" The sea snatched the peach and swiftly carried it away. What came next sounded like an old woman snapping to hide her grief. We'd been separated and wanted to be reunited. The purpose of flesh was to carry the water, you understand? You probably don't. A tiny creeper like you couldn't possibly understand. Yours? A. P.S. News from our Arctic sister. We're getting somewhere. Dear A. It's true, I did once divulge the entire plan to a creeper. It didn't matter. It didn't have a clue either way. I wonder, do you understand what it's like for me? You're so big the planet has to carry you with both hands, but I just lie here with the coasts around my neck. When you turn away, I have no one to talk to. I'm tired. It's the season. Summer wears me down. It didn't used to be so bad, but now the creepers constantly clamber around on me in their pods. Far too many in one pod. I listen to the sinking shoals, the sound of brains clicking that gradually swells and then ebbs out. They stand on the bottom and sway, their lungs twitching with plankton and krill. When the eels come, I look away. Yours, M. Dear little sister, your despair pains me. Try to look on the bright side instead. It won't be long now. I feel an algae green silence bloom inside me, beautiful like the pink gas that in recent years has hung heavy and slick, almost greasy across my forehead. If you can, think about the universe, and look, see what I've found. My brother fell in the water. Now he's flown away, that's what my mother says. We put flowers on the water. I kiss the flower's eye before I put it down. A. Big sister, thank you, but do you think we'll forget? The creepers, everything. There are times, typically in the early morning, when I rest on my bed like an affectionate blanket, and I feel happy because everything is clear. But then suddenly, I become confused. Where will all the birds land? Does my question make sense? M. Dear little sister, I think I understand. When I was young, a crack at the very back of my being led to the first sea. Through it, I could reach everything I remembered about the time before the land rose up. But as the millennia passed, what little I could remember became less and less. One day, the memory was completely gone. Instead, there was an unsettling certainty that something had disappeared, a void in my new being through which a draft snuck in. Yours, A. Sister, am I my face? Will I recognize my face when I'm no longer me? When I am us? Will I sense my old face as a layer of skin beneath the new one? I have these doubts. I don't doubt the plan, of course not, but lately I've had this thought, that my eye, when I leave it, will be left on its own. I try to think of my being, my eye, as the skin of an animal or a shell, something that can be left behind. Yours, Silly Puddle. Dear sister, soon great forest will once more grow in us, fat and black with nourishment. Think about that. Just think. We'll be the only sound in the world. Yours, A. Dear you, forgive me, but precisely that thought can feel so terribly lonely. M. Dear M, the pink evening gas now caresses my old cheeks. The heat lies heavy inside and on top of me. Think of the coasts as a costume. All we seas are in disguise. You won't be lonely, I promise. We'll be a mirror ball, an eye.
Nu kommer jeg ud af byen. Det er de sidste veje. Det er til at fornemme. En susen fra en større trafik.
Finally, I crossed the edge of town. The last roads, you can almost feel it. The drone of heavy traffic. An intersection where the highway lets out into Viborg. A few flat, grey, windowless factories. As a kid, you drive past them in the back seat of the car on the way to family birthday parties and Christmas Eve celebrations. But they're anonymous. You don't know anything about them. There's a gas station on the other side of the intersection. Little activity, cars coming and going, but I don't really see them. Just some movement in my peripheral vision. I cross the street and turn onto an asphalt road. The buildings start to thin out, Viborg and the hinterlands. I could stop for a moment to reflect here, about how town fades into country, about the permeability of boundaries. They can always be deconstructed, but they still exist. But I'd rather not. I walk along a suburban road. There aren't any cars. The sun is burning above the trees. The air is still. It's very warm. I sense the life here, weak sounds, something familiar about the gentle wording, people behind fences. I hold one of my hands up in front of my face and consider it for a moment. I don't know why. Then I consider the little blue sign in the grass along the road, which indicates the direction of the path. A pictogram of a white man. Kjærvejen, the old oxen trail, the droving road, the trade route, a road network, a branching of paths from antiquity through the Jutland hills, continuing into Europe. I leave a little fringe of wood and notice more in another field. The field is green, the sky is blue. The sun is white. Some horses trotting around, their backs shining in the sun. A row of identical houses is partially hidden by the trees. I can see into the backyards. A woman is pacing while talking on the phone. A book is propped open on the lounge chair next to her. I walk through the field and turn onto a bike path. The cars hum on nearby roads. An overpass hidden by the trees. Two kids bike past me, a boy and a girl wearing brightly colored backpacks. The girl stands on her pedals as she turns towards the boy, laughing as she says something to him. A little while later, a woman walks by. She gives me a friendly smile as we pass. In the following seconds, I assemble a few thoughts about my new identity as a hiker. A hiker attracts attention, but not suspicion. That's just the way it is. No matter who he is. I'm the kind of person you want to say hello to. I look familiar, even though they don't know who I am or what I'm like. My Friluftsland backpack and walking stick make me momentarily decodable in the context of the surrounding landscape. And strangers greet me almost reflexively. People like this version of me, hiking with my backpack on. That was what her smile conveyed. Her smile wasn't intended for me, it was for the hiker. As a hiker, I'm recognizable and well-liked. But as a hiker, I can also avoid the suspicion that a single man in public might otherwise attract. With the help of a nylon backpack and a wooden stick, I can be recognizable and well-liked among other people. I think about the figures I see in their backyards. Some of them can probably see me too, on the other side of the trees. A young man in a blue t-shirt walks by me on the bike path. Unaware, I am registered, captured by a glance. All of these eyes suck me into the consciousnesses around me. I become affixed to their memories and lives. I cross a highway overpass, stop in the middle and stare down at the traffic until my vision goes blurry and I only see a horizontal stream of noise and colour. Further along, the path leads to a tranquil forest of pine trees and town and traffic disappear. I haven't seen another person for a half hour now. That's a long time for Danish standards. I follow a set of tractor tracks, which dissect the trail like two long rulers, deep and full of water in the black soil. Insects buzz in the reflected light. I walk along the ridge between the tracks. All around me, the sun is shining through the pines in foggy wedges of light. Young pine trees. There, a pile of tree trunks is concealed by a tarp. It's hot. The air is stagnant. Not even a slight breeze. What's my plan? I'm hiking from Viborg to Padborg. It's a reasonable and not overly ambitious plan. It feels capacious. I have room to breathe. I shouted goodbye to the students and started walking over the hills. The sun was high in the sky. It was a little past 3 o'clock. The temperature and light were at their peak. The whole landscape shimmered. The Danish lakelands balanced between the Jutland hills, beech trees and fresh water lakes. Geologic remains in the technologic warmth of summer. Insects and birds in the sky above the hills. Invisible insects, invisible birds, only their chirping was audible. Abstract and incomprehensible verses. Warnings and signs of war, their divisions of the terrain. The desiccated moors reached back through time and simultaneously were present here and now. Sweat on my face. My psyche unfolded and receptive, like an orchid unfolding its head, letting itself be run through by the landscape as it grew. The temperature, rain, and insects. The branchings of the psyche into its surroundings, like a pattern on a tapestry. Endless weavings, fields and crossings, incomprehensible channels. The oldest trail networks, bestial infrastructures, warmth and night, particular light frequencies. You are never alone with yourself. A collective creeping, a collective fear. Man is bound to the violent and the wordless. Sometimes you can't comprehend the thoughts you think with, the voices you talk to. They run through your head instinctively and spew out of your mouth. But there's something about the speed you remember. Perhaps from the floods and winds, the whirling in patterns man has been part of, the prehistoric elements. Underworlds of fire and darkness. Here, you deal in gnarled language. You grasp toward a luminous grammar, glowing signs. Every speech act, every movement is a dissolution, a collective fabric in formation.
Thanks, Theis.
Patterns traverse matter.
So we will proceed with the Q&A session. So I have prepared some questions that I would like to ask you. I'm very curious about. So in my talk, I use the terms cli-fi, eco-poetry, even environmentalist literature. Does it bother you to have your works associated with these sort of rather fluid, generic labels or terms?
To me, it doesn't, not really. I'm interested in both ecology and poetry, so I mean, it's kind of natural for me.
It doesn't bother me either. It isn't all of the terms that I think I necessarily fully understand, but I don't mind being associated with them.
Okay. But so why do sort of ecological concerns feature in your work?
I think they have to. I mean, there's no way around those topics, to me at least. So, I mean, I think in a way, all literature today is climate literature. You could argue, because we live in an age of ecological disaster. So, in a way, all kinds of literature are waved into it, I think.
Mm. Yeah.
I agree. And I'm also very, which also speaks a lot to what you just read. I'm very interested in how things are connected and interwoven. And if that's something that interests you artistically, nature is a very good place to be.
Mm. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. Yeah, and I also think that sort of relates well to the sort of passages you read from your work. I think that sort of, at least the sort of the passages that you read, they were sort of very, sort of the description was sort of very obvious, where there's this sort of connection between, or sort of merge between nature and culture, right?
Mm.
Sort of these landscapes that are to a certain extent very much human formed, but at the same time are not only human formed, right? Yeah. So, Theis, some years ago you traveled to Siberia to see the permafrost crates deriving from global warming. Has this experience affected you in your writing?
Yeah, I think it has. I wrote an essay about the travel, so in a direct way they did inspire me in a monstrous way. I think it was like they were really big, so to stand right in front of them was quite amazing in a way. I mean, they felt kind of alive, so and they are so far away from from society, like in a physical dimension. So yeah, in a way, I mean, we don't know where they come from, but I mean, the theory that I've read claims that they come from global warming because the permafrost is melting or thawing. So and there's a lot of gas bound in the underground, which is bound to explode, and because it expands, and so they're interesting in the way that they're both geological phenomenons and also cultural or societal. So to me, they were like a really concrete example of how the Anthropocene looks like, because they were both geological and culturally produced at the same time. So that it's really interwoven.
Yeah. So, but so you mentioned your essay, but I can also have mentioned that essay today. But so still, when you wrote Solar, was that experience still with you in a way?
I mean, it's been a while since I wrote Solar.
Yeah.
I wrote it in 2017, so it's 3 years ago now. But I think they were in a way. I mean, yeah. I don't really remember, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I wrote an essay about it.
Yeah.
So but I found out that it was really. I mean, in a way, I was like mentally inspired by it, but in my writing, it was really difficult. I found out to write about the experience because I don't know why, but it was really difficult to transport it from an experience into fiction, at least. I couldn't really do that, and I don't know really why.
Okay, interesting. And Siri, sort of in the process of writing the sea letters, have you done research on issues that relate to sort of the global ecological crisis, or like, for example, Theis that traveled to Siberia, or have you sort of in particularly, read stuff, sort of reports by natural sciences or articles in sort of natural scientific journals, or?
I read those articles and reports all the time. I haven't read them specifically as research for the work, rather the opposite. I tried actually to limit my research as much as I could. I think much like you said before, it's almost impossible not to write climate-related literature because ideas permeate communities, and we are permeated with climate change. And I'm also personally very invested and interested in it politically. But what I researched was the sort of geological history, the history of the oceans, specifically the history of the Mediterranean, and how it's been filled and then drained and filled again, and how that might affect a personality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, really interesting. So what about other kinds of, other authors writing on these issues, or even I sort of showed you a clip from a sort of a popular cultural movie. Do you also sort of take inspiration from is there sort of specific authors writing on climate change or sort of other ecological topics that you take inspiration from when you, for example, when you wrote the Sea Letters or Solar or some of your other works?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been very fond of the Swedish poet Thomas Tranströmer, who I think wrote what you would call eco-poetry today. I don't necessarily think that he thought about it that way, but he's a hero of mine. Mm-hmm. And also Inger Christensen, our Danish great poet, who, she's been a big inspiration for me.
Yeah. So I don't know their work that well, but it seems to me that they don't mention specifically probably because it was too early for them, right, to refer directly to the climate crisis, for example. So, but it's, I don't know if I'm correct in that. I don't,
No, but I mean, for example, Inger Christensen, she has those kind of connections between the political and the cosmic layers of the world, and I mean that's been one of the main inspirations for me in Danish literature, like her way of combining the everyday life of the 70s or 60s, and then with some large cosmic and ecological galactic layers of the world.
Yeah. Are you sort of acquainted with Torkel Bjørnvi's book, The Dolphin? Have you read? No, it's because really. It's sort of the really 70s literature in that way. They're sort of really almost, in a certain extent, social realistic, social realism, because so they deal with sort of environmental issues in a not very abstract way. Where I think Inger Christensen or Tranströmer, they have a sort of much more aesthetical ambition, I would say. So it's just interesting to hear, because that is more sort of an inspiration than that sort of more political kind of literature that appeared sort of very early on in the 70s. So what about you, Siri? Inspirations that sort of other authors that deal with these issues, or?
Yes and no. I think I'm much more inspired by theory now. And
what kind of theory?
Natur, for example. But also like Ursula Le Guin's essays, which I would also consider a kind of theory. But then at the same time, I mean, reading right now, I was hearing myself reading a line, and I'm pretty sure I actually stole that more or less directly from Poems 2014.
Oh, really?
So that's, I mean, so of course, there's a lot of ideas and inspiration going around, but I don't have the same things. I don't have heroes in that sense relating to this theme.
Yeah.
I don't.
But sort of the way I see it, when I read the Sea Letters, they're all very far away, of course, from theory. Like it's a totally different media, right?
Sure.
So how do sort of theory permeate into your, if you can sort of?
I think it's hard to escape it.
Yeah.
I had a really strange experience with the Sea Letters, where it is, in a review of it, in a Danish newspaper, the reviewer said, it's very clear that this author is heavily inspired by Astrid Lindgrens and, what is it called in English? Hydrofeminism.
Yeah.
And I had never heard that term, and I had not been acquainted in any way with that theorist. But reading the sea letters and then acquainting myself with the theory after, it's very clearly sort of in the same field of ideas, in the same puddle of thoughts.
Yeah.
So I think it's hard to escape theory.
Yeah.
At least when you're situated like I am, sort of between academia and art.
Yeah, and I actually know that also because we've talked about it a long time ago. I know you're very you read a lot of theory, philosophy as well.
It's been a while, actually, but I used to do.
Yeah.
And then I've kind of flew into fiction again.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about Donna Haraway the other day because her line, "Staying with the trouble," keeps coming back to me as some kind of chorus, like mental or theoretical chorus in these times, like staying with the trouble. It seems to me to be the most intelligent and exact way of describing what it's all about, what people should do at the moment.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
I feel the same way.
Yeah, but can you elaborate on that? So stay with the trouble in which way, or in which ways?
Yeah.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, there are some branches of the Anthropocene which seems to me to be about continuing the separation between society, human society, and nature. And it could be seen as a comment to that, but it could also be a comment to everything, like so much else. I mean, that's why it's so intelligent. I mean, it's also mysterious, but it has some clarity at the same time. So I mean, it's like an ethical imperative in a way. I think that we shouldn't have the illusion that we can, both on a personal level and on a collective level, ever get rid of any kinds of trouble or disturbances or death, or like you have to live your life with all those things and forces.
Yeah, I understand what you mean.
And for me, it's also very much a question of allowing for complexity. I think that we have, especially in our part of culture, we have the culture of our countries, we have sort of a way to deal with complexity and deal with trouble by picking a perspective and staying with it. So the winning perspective, the way forward. And I think it's much more interesting and sustainable to allow for a flux of perspectives, which is going to be troublesome.
Yeah, actually I had a sort of a question written down that I think fits quite well with what you've been saying, and so I think I will ask you that question now. So the Anthropocene has, for sort of many people concerned with the global ecological crisis, become sort of a well-known concept or even a buzzword. However, one could say that your books downplay human agency. So why is that?
I mean, in my case, it just happened when I wrote Solar. I mean, I knew that I would like it to be some kind of psychological apocalypse or psychological mutation in a way. I mean, that's what the book is about, at least to myself. Like, I knew that I would like it to start in what has been named autofiction in our country, and then I would like it to mutate out of the autofiction and into some kind of weird adventure in a way. That was my main thought before I began, and then I found out during the writing that it was about myself in a way, and as an example of a human being that loses, what did you call it? Agency.
Yeah, human agency.
Yeah, and so it begins with a high level of agency and a very cultural, conscious mind, and then, at least to myself, it drifts into some kind of almost reptilian. Or, I mean, yeah, I think it drifts into the animal kingdom in a way. Book.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but it is about it's about apocalypse as a necessity for the growth of something new. Also, I think.
Yeah.
That you have to disintegrate sometimes, both as a person but also as a society, to become more intelligent.
Yeah.
So my book stops right there, where the last part begins. Where, you know.
Yeah. Siri.
I wouldn't say that I downplay human agency at all.
No, perhaps not.
I would say that I imbue humans with a lot of agency. They're instrumental in bringing forth what I guess in the context of the Ocean Letters is a utopia, just the utopia of the oceans. But what I really wanted to do and what I'm trying to do in that book is sort of include more than human perspectives and more than human scales. And doing that, the human perspective becomes one perspective out of a multitude.
Yeah.
And that's not the center stage position we're used to, obviously.
No. So maybe this is going a bit back to an earlier point in our conversation, but I think it's important to ask you anyway. So, but is there really a sort of a strong agenda for a sustainable transformation behind your work, or are they first and foremost sort of aesthetical, or is it sort of the main reason that you write? Is it more to convey sort of desires, experience, thoughts in an aesthetically way to readers, or is there sort of a genuine sustainability agenda, or is sort of you sort of already indicated that you're sort of very occupied with politics, but I think some authors would say, well, first and foremost, this is a sort of, it's more an aesthetical work rather than a political work, or is it somewhere in between? It's just,
I think that conversation often ends up being a conversation that's actually about something else entirely, which is the politics of art. And creating a space for yourself as an artist where you can write without being tied to concrete political agendas. But the most honest answer I can give for myself is that, of course, there's an agenda, because I cannot detach myself from my political convictions. But at the same time, it's not, I don't know what Ecopoetry is called in English, but it's not like, it's not
agitation.
It's not agitation, and it's not instructive, which for me is the main difference. Haubrevne is not instructive.
No.
But of course it's political.
Yeah. 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 So Theis, sort of, it's, how about you? Is it sort of, are you comfortable with that sort of when you sort of sit down and write a book, or however it works for you when you wrote sort of Solar? Is there an intention sort of behind it all to push people in a sort of certain political direction or towards sustainability, or is that something that is very far from that kind of writing?
I don't know what to answer actually, because I mean, you must feel this. I can speak for myself. There are a lot of like different forces behind my writing and in my writing. So, and some of them I know and I'm aware of them, and some of them I don't know because they're unconscious, I think.
Yeah. Sure.
So, and I find it increasingly difficult to separate them the more I write. I mean, that's what I meant by starting Solar out in some kind of well-known universe for myself, and then let it migrate out of it into the unknown, or what you would call it. So I felt like I lost control in a way, at least, but not completely, of course. So it's when I write, I think there are so many how do you call it? I mean, I'm both in control and out of control when I write, I think. But I mean, there's anger, for example, which I think comes from a feeling that people should act more ecological. So, I mean, in a way, I would have to say yes, but then in another way, I would say no, because my writing is also about, fundamentally about experimenting with matter, I think. Just like everybody else who makes something don't know what the outcome will be. So it's a difficult but good question.
Yeah.
I think if I could add something.
Yeah, please.
Just for Havbrevene, I mean, it very clearly discusses or deals with the field between agency and impotency, and it's one strong perspective in the book is very critical of a certain way of presenting art and politics, and those things are of course coming through me. But at the same time, so I could say that that is sort of that's political matter, and it's in the book. But at the same time, I also just really wanted to write a story on a geological scale, because that's awesome and interesting and fascinating and breaks something open in my head that I can work with. And I can't claim that for politics, you know? I can't say people should follow me into the geological perspective.
Exactly.
I mean, so it's a lot more, like you say, it's a lot more complex.
Yeah. So and I sort of really, you know, I can really identify with when you use the word instructive, because I do, you know, I write actually the political books that are instructive to a certain extent, that sort of basically try to engage people, to tell them what to think and do in a certain extent. So and you know, we're very far from that with your work, of course. Yeah,
while at the same time I also think that both our works in different ways are also championing different ways of being political, and different ways of relating to the world. And in that way, it's not instructive. We don't go out and say, you should really consider yourself interwoven with all life. But in opening and like making available those perspectives, that is also sort of, that's a political act.
Yeah, that's also a kind of politics.
It's just a more gentle politics.
This is perhaps, it's a very difficult question, and I don't expect you to sort of, you know, to speak the truth here, or in some way sort of have sort of one answer to this. But in your eyes, what basically drives the human destruction of the non-human world today? It's sort of, because there are of course sort of you can look at it in various ways. You can talk about, I think you explore some of the psychological perhaps reasons, and you can also see there are political reasons, there are economic reasons, but sort of what is sort of in your, I think at least to me it would be interesting to hear about.
Well, to answer shortly, I would say capitalism. I mean, but that's also the easy answer.
But it's also the correct answer.
I think so.
But how sort of, but capitalism in which way then? It's sort of, and how does capitalism sort of inflate with the sort of the sort of this destruction process also within the human, or in the sort of the sort of social psychology, or how is it present? Because of course it can be. I think it is. You know, I agree. It's present in so many ways, but so can you sort of just elaborate on sort of where you see?
Yeah, I think the separation between nature and humans is has a lot to do with the capitalistic way of behaving in the world. I mean, and I think it has a lot to do with the disappearance of the sacrifice. Actually, I mean, in pre-modern times, many places around the world, the sacrifice, like in pre-civilizatory societies, the sacrifice, I think, has been very central, and it had to do with respect to the nature, that you inhabited and was a part of. So every time you took something from nature, you made a sacrifice. And as far as I'm concerned, capitalism has removed the sacrifice from the human world. So we just took from the oceans, we took from the animals, we took from the earth, we took from the woods, we took everything without making a sacrifice. So we thought I mean, late modern capitalistic people think that the planet is dead and doesn't have any consciousness. And I think that's the main problem, actually, that we lost the sacrifice, that we removed the sacrifice from our culture.
I think I very much agree. I think I can add, because it's so central to Havbrevene and in general to what I write, that I think also a certain way of thinking about the individual that was in our part of the world was instated with Enlightenment, and has sort of haunted us and fucked things up for us ever since. I think that is also instrumental, but it plays very strongly together with capitalism, the idea of human exceptionalism and of the exceptional individual. And I think if there is something instructive in what I do, it is constantly trying to open a perspective where that is not the case.
Okay, I think that leads, I would say, to my last question. So in your books, the future is portrayed rather gloomy, I would say. So, or at least from sort of a human perspective. Is that because you have no hope that the future will bring solutions to the global ecological crisis?
I mean, it varies a lot. I mean, I feel like manio-depressive on a daily level, daily basic, I think, when it comes to whether I should feel hope for the future, or who it is that should feel hope. So I think it's a very difficult question to answer. I mean, in a way, I think utopia and dystopia have grown together in some kind of, like when I imagine, it's very difficult to imagine some kind of understandable future, I think, with technology. And I mean, it just seems so, I mean, the word monstrosity comes up instead of hope when I think about the future.
So technological monstrosity, very few ecosystems left, or in that sense?
Yeah, in the worst case scenario.
Yeah. Like in a way, Blade Runner, the first Blade Runner, perhaps that could be.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No. Hope for the future.
Well, yeah, but I think I'm kind of tired of talking about hope. I'd much rather talk about plans of action and doing. Hoping is also, I think we're safeguarding ourselves a little bit with all of this hope. I mean, there's a lot of, we sort of have, at least in Denmark, our climate politics or environmental politics are almost like hope-based politics, not so much based in realistic projections of what's going to happen. They keep moving it ahead because something's got to give. And in that sense, I don't think hope is so interesting, but I do have it. I'm quite hopeful that some kind of humanity will endure, and I'm also quite hopeful that our societies and the way that we've organized the world as it is now will not endure. Like, I very strongly hope that that will fall and that we will rebuild something that's sustainable.
Thank you. So Theis and Siri, thank you so much for a really interesting talk. I hope the viewers have enjoyed it as well, as much as I did. So thank you.
Thank you.